Welcome to The Context, a podcast about the past, present, and future of democracy from the Charles F. Kettering Foundation. I'm your host, Alex Levitt. This episode is releasing on New Year's Eve, so we're taking this opportunity to revisit some of the guests we've had on the show during this first year of the Context podcast. This is a special episode. It's a little different from what we've done before. For one thing, there's a video version of this episode, which you can find on YouTube or through some podcast players. On today's show, you're going to hear from three different people: James Comey, Stacey Abrams, and David Pepper. Each of them is best known for their political careers. James Comey served as the director of the FBI. Stacey Abrams served in the Georgia State House of Representatives, including 6 years as minority leader. And David Pepper served in elected office before becoming chairman of the Ohio Democratic Party. But besides public service, what unites all three of these people is that they all also have had careers as novelists, often drawing from their work in government to depict political and legal issues through fiction. All three of these people have already been guests on this podcast, but the material you're about to hear hasn't previously been shared. I think it's interesting that all of these very accomplished public figures have made space in their life for creative writing, in addition to their public service. And all three of them also see fiction as a way of translating their experience and communicating knowledge and insights about politics and public institutions. Here at the Kettering Foundation, we believe that artistic expression can help citizens understand and support core democratic values. In fact, one of the 5 focus areas guiding the Foundation's work is democracy and the arts. So we agree with Comey, Abrams, and Pepper that fiction can be a way of communicating serious ideas and helping people make meaning of the world they live in. First up is James Comey, talking about his first novel, Central Park West. Since this interview was recorded, Comey has also published his second novel, Westport. Of communication and openness. You recently wrote a novel, Central Park West, which is informed by your professional experience. You've just told me that a sequel is coming out soon. I'm now eagerly anticipating that. And I don't want to spoil the book because it's a fun read and the twists and the turns of the plot are part of the fun. But to me, the book does seem a little cynical. Politicians in it are deceptive. The justice system has limits in determining the truth. But what do you think? Does Central Park West have something to say about the limitations of the justice system? Or am I just reading too much into an entertaining crime novel?
No, I think you're reading it right. I wrote it. It reflects my view of the world, which is both optimistic and pessimistic in different measures. And so, as I said earlier, that what I mean when I talk about the justice system being flawed because it's run by people is that people often do, and there are no perfectly good people or perfectly bad people. We're all this mix. And so people are complicated. And because of that, the system in which they operate is complicated. People lie quite often. And our justice system is designed consistent with a set of rules. It's not to find absolute truth, but to find truth consistent with a standard of proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And one of the things, and I too will not give stuff away, I hope folks will read it and enjoy it, but one of the lessons of Central Park West is you can know something to be true, but not be able to hold someone legally accountable for that because of the burdens that our system of justice, rightly in my view, impose on prosecutors to prove something beyond a reasonable doubt. And that can be frustrating for people, but we've chosen to strike a balance in this country where we risk letting the guilty go so that we don't convict the innocent. And we still do both of those things. Guilty people still get away and innocent people still get convicted. But the idea behind our justice system is we are best positioned to try and be just if we impose a certain burden on proving something. And that's just the way the world is. And so I've tried to communicate in that book both my view of people, that they're complicated, and my view of the system, that it's imperfect and strikes balances in a way that often frustrate people.
Next is Stacey Abrams, talking about her wide-ranging career, including as a prolific author. You famously developed this spreadsheet back in college that planned out your professional path as an author, as a politician, in business, and you've had success in all of those fields. You've written, I think, 10 novels. I don't know if I'm up to date.
So actually, I've written a total of 18 books now.
Okay. Well, I'm behind in my reading your bibliography. But my question is, Do you see those as sort of separate lines on the spreadsheet? Is the fiction an escape from politics, or do you see the fiction as an opportunity to address some of the same public issues that you addressed in your political career?
So I operate in the public sector, the private sector, the nonprofit sector. And there are tools in all of those sectors to share stories and to create a shared vision of what's possible. For me, writing began as an outlet, but it quickly became a tool for not only storytelling, but for vision making. And I see them as interconnected. I've written at this point, 11 novels have been published. I've published 3 children's books. I have published 4 nonfiction works. I've got a few more in the offing. And in each one of those, my mission is to tell a story about what we can be. And you do so by bringing people into where we are. I do the same in my political work. I do the same in my business. My job is to weave together imagination and opportunity and turn it into action. And so I don't see them as separate. Someone asked me once, so which lane do you want to eventually be in? And I'm like, I see my life as a freeway. So I change lanes as necessary, but they're all heading in the same direction.
Finally, my conversation with David Pepper about the challenges of communicating political messages through fiction. We've primarily been discussing your nonfiction books, Laboratories of Autocracy and Saving Democracy. But you're a prolific guy. You also write a daily Substack, and you're a novelist. You've written 4, I believe, political thrillers now. And of course, your fiction is informed by your knowledge and experience of politics, including some of the same issues you discuss in your nonfiction. Do you think of those novels as a vehicle to communicate about problems of democracy, or are you just aiming to entertain?
No, that's why I wrote the first one. So my first novel, we haven't covered this. I ran statewide in 2010 for state auditor, largely because if I had won, we could have ended gerrymandering. Then I helped with an initial statewide initiative in 2012 to end gerrymandering. And what I concluded from both my run and that effort was that no one knew anything about gerrymandering. So my first novel, believe it or not, was an attempt to inform people about gerrymandering through a novel. And I called it The People's House. And it was about how screwed up government is when everything's gerrymandered. Now, the problem is, as a novel sort of marketer, that's the worst idea for a novel ever. Who wants to read a novel about gerrymandering? So early on, I thought, you know what? I got to spice this novel up a little bit. And again, I had never written a book in my life. I knew nothing about it. I knew nothing about publishing. I added a Russian oligarch because I used to do some work in Russia. And he was the bad guy who took advantage of gerrymandering. And he did it in Ohio. And he almost and he's the one looking at gerrymandering as a guy from another country saying, that's the most screwed up system ever, but boy, can I take advantage of it to get what I want. And so that my first novel was called The People's House. And not to tout it too much, but it went viral. Why? Because after the 2016 election, there was a lot of similarity between my Russian bad guy who was rigging American elections and all the talk about what Putin did and others did, that the novel really took off. And it got sort of a lot of coverage as the novel that predicted the Russia scandal, was how one magazine put it. But the whole point of that book from the very beginning was to use a story and interesting characters to make people see how bad gerrymandering is. And to some degree, it worked. You know, my 2 brothers are very apolitical, but they're my brothers, so they read my novel, and the novel it's a good story. Most people seem to like it. It got good reviews. It actually got reviewed by the Wall Street Journal, surprisingly, in a very positive way. But when my brothers finished that first book, they did say to me, boy, that gerrymandering sounds really bad. And I thought, mission accomplished. I got it done. And so all of my novels do try to... Now, I learned, though, in writing that first book, if you try and overpreach in a novel, your novel is bad. A novel has to be about a good story, compelling characters, and there's some lessons that may come out of the story, but if you try and overdo it, you're writing a bad book. And so I think I found that balance in my books where it's always the point is to entertain, good fiction, good stories, good characters. But yeah, part of every novel is also some real world politics that I hope make people see differently the world that they might not have seen before. And I'm a reader of both novels and a lot of nonfiction, a lot of fiction. And I choose sort of whether to do nonfiction or fiction. Sometimes I actually think fiction can be the best way to bring out some aspects of problems more than nonfiction. And my hope is my novels are able to do that sometimes in a way that maybe a nonfiction book would simply be preaching to the choir.
So you're talking there about the challenge of having of trying to inform readers while also entertain, and that it's challenging to write an entertaining yarn about gerrymandering. In political thrillers as a genre, there tends to be a lot of corruption, sort of dysfunction, and your books don't lack for that. And it's harder to tell a story about an honest politician and government agencies working effectively. Do you worry of that fiction about government might contribute to public cynicism and distrust?
Yeah, but I hate to say it, not as much as the reality of the world right now. I mean, I try and capture it. My goal has never been to overstate the case. Sure, I have a Russian bad guy figure it out, but what I describe in terms of gerrymandering, or my most recent book, which is called The Fifth Vote, is about corruption. I actually try and capture the reality. One way in political thrillers at least, I never wanted to write a book that a reader would think, oh, that's so unrealistic, that would never happen. I think I would lose my readers at that point. So I'll add some thrilling, somewhat, if there's some violence, although not much. I'll add that to spice up the plot. But the underlying political reality that I try and describe, I would say, is largely how it works. Or in some cases, believe it or not, I wrote a book called The Wingman. It's my second book. It's a follow-up. The first three are sort of a trilogy. And it's all about third parties being used as vehicles or kind of phony candidates being used as vehicles to undermine the favorite. Sometimes what I write actually comes true later. I mean, we're seeing that right now. Not everyone's going to agree, but when I see this no labels and I see like Robert Kennedy, I mean, it's literally my plot from a book I wrote 7 years ago. Hey, stick another candidate in the middle of an election and you may pull votes away from the favorite and get your way. So, sometimes if I've gotten a little bit like into an interesting plot, a couple years later, I see it actually playing out. So, and that's one reason people have enjoyed my books is a couple years later, they all start writing me saying, how'd you know that was going to happen? But I generally try and keep to the world as I see it. And if it's contributing to some cynicism about what's happening, it may be because I'm describing a reality that some haven't seen. Again, characters and certain scenes are clearly made up. But the heart of gerrymandering, the heart of corruption, in some cases I describe it, I hate to say it, are often based on real world sort of knowledge or things I've researched.
Well, perhaps you should be careful who you inspire if it's coming true.
Yeah, exactly. No, I literally had someone on Twitter. I had a few people accuse me of inspiring Putin by describing how you might get involved in an American election and screw up the results. And I would always defend myself. One person actually started following me on Twitter and would always tweet that I was a Russian spy. And I'd respond, well, one, my book didn't come out early enough that anyone could have modeled their plot off of it. And two, if I really were a spy, would I reveal my plot through a novel before the election took place? But yeah, I've had that come up every once in a while that maybe I should stop because I'm inspiring the wrong people to do the wrong things.
Thanks for watching or listening to this special episode of The Context, talking with three people who have combined prominent careers in public service with careers as novelists. If you're interested in reading any of the books you've just heard about, there are links in the show notes. Thanks for watching or listening. Happy New Year, and we'll be back in a couple of weeks in the Context podcast feed with more conversations about democracy.